I'm Doug Quine. I'm Doug Quine, and I'm the co-founder and webmaster of the Auxiliary Markings Club for 22 years. And I earned my BA at Princeton University in biology and my PhD at Cornell University. And in my talk today, you'll learn the rest of the story. Today, I'll be speaking about modern postal history treasures that hide in plain sight on covers that most people ignore. One second there. Okay, here is a cover with a nice auxiliary marking. Why was it misdirected? I will answer this and many other questions in today's talk. Let me start at the beginning. I started stamp collecting when I was 3 years old. I took stamps, licked them, put them on a piece of paper, and colored around them. This is not a recommended collecting method. My mother kept that original collection, and I moved into a more traditional stamp album. At age 11 in 1962, I saw this fat Scott Jr. International album at a school flea market, and I snatched it up for 30 cents. Later, in 1982, Elaine Borgerer at Lynn Stamp News published an article about the new postnet barcodes and how to decode them. I checked my daily mail and discovered a 100% error rate. With 500 million pieces a day, the US Postal Service was apparently in for a disaster, and I was hooked. I analyzed 10,000 covers from everybody I could talk to, asking them for covers, which I displayed and published my observations. 85% of the handwritten mail got misbarcoded. My exhibit won a Vermeer Medal and 2 special research awards, a groundbreaking achievement for an exhibit where most expensive covers cost 25 cents. A year later, Martin Marietta asked me to fly out to Denver to discuss my postal automation hobby. At that time, I was an assistant professor at the University of Illinois, so I took a day off and flew out to Denver. Their program director said they planned to build a machine in 6 months that read addresses on envelopes and barcoded them. I explained to him there was no way that was going to happen, and they were so appreciative of my forthright discussion that in less than 2 hours, they offered to hire me as one of the first employees of Martin Marietta Postal Systems, and moved us from Champaign-Urbana, Illinois to Winter Park, Florida, all expenses paid. We were ready for a change, and we did. My Evolution of an Exhibitor article described my career change from biology to postal automation. Later, I made a web page for decoding barcodes. At Martin Marietta Postal Systems, I helped develop and field test the delivery barcode sorter, and later became the program manager at Pitney Bowes for barcoding systems. I also put together an online glossary of Postal Service acronyms. I realized from the website logs that most of the users were actually postal employees who didn't know their own acronyms, and also companies who were working on responding to RFPs, responses for proposal. So they were trying to bid for programs and would use my glossary to find out what the words meant. Later on, I co-founded the Auxiliary Markings Club when John Hoshner put an article, a letter in Lynn Stamp News asking if there ought to be such a club. And I figured the way to respond was to vote with my feet. So I created the website, bought the URL, set it all up, and went live and responded to him. Yes, I think we should have a club. The website is live, and here's the URL. And we're now in our 22nd year. And finally, at Pitney Bowes, I got 50 patents for various inventions in postal automation and security. Well, enough about my history. Let's begin with a postnet barcode you've probably seen on your mail if you're in the United States. Have you ever thought about what it tells? What can go wrong? Let's start with how it's made. Imagine a continuous inkjet printer squirting droplets of ink. It squirts all the time on a multi-line optical character reader, but most of the time there's no need for the ink. So it's aimed low, goes into a gutter, and flows back into the tank. 10 times a second, an envelope comes by, and like an electron beam on an old TV, the inkjet is diverted up and makes the barcode lines. At this scale, they all run together. But if you look with a magnifying glass, you can actually see the individual dots. And the slanting line, which is originally painted, gets straightened out as the envelope moves by if it's moving at the right speed. If it's a little bit off in the speed, then the barcodes will tilt to the right or to the left. This 11-digit postnet zip barcode actually represents the mail slot on my door. You may think that 9 digits is all there is to a full zip code, but that's not true. 11 digits are needed to code a house, and I'll show you a map in a couple of minutes explaining the difference between the 9 and the 11-digit zip codes. The USPS often also prints the human readable barcode digits to the left, and this makes it possible if the letters get misplaced, they can read the human readable to see what it is the barcode represents. And the 2 digits at the end there actually are the carrier route number. They're not the last 2 digits of the and last of all, in between the first 5 and the next 4, you see a character, in this case, a hyphen. That character tells you which software read the address and printed the barcode. And that's very useful. If something goes wrong, then they can look at that code and see what went wrong, which piece of the software was the cause of that answer. Well, sometimes things don't go quite so well. Here's a poorly adjusted printer, and I think you'll agree that's a pretty difficult to read barcode. It's supposed to just be nice, clean, tall, and short bars. Here's another case, just little wisps of ink above the short bars. Make that a very difficult barcode to read. I don't think any of the barcode readers that are used here would have read that one. Here's a case of the ink continuously spraying on the envelope. Remember, I mentioned that the ink is actually coming out of the print jet all the time and is supposed to be diverted into a gutter and carried away unless there's an envelope there, in which case it moves up and down to print the barcode. Obviously, in this case, the inkjet was aimed a little bit too high, missed the gutter, and went on the envelope. Here are 2 interesting matched envelopes. They both came from the same doctor's office, and the top one has just the faintest traces of a barcode, basically just a cloud of ink. And at the bottom, there's a massive blob of ink on the left. I believe that that massive blob of ink was associated with an inkjet printer that was squirting while the envelope got stuck in the track. Maybe the transport stopped or something got stuck, and it resulted in the ink just spraying all in one general area. Well, here's a quick tutorial on how to decipher the American zip codes. The first 3 digits tell you the hub. We have a hub and spoke delivery system. The big processing centers are located at hubs. And then the digits 4 and 5, the 01 there, that's the town that I live in, Bethel, Connecticut. They're organized alphabetically. Bethel happens to be the first town in the Stamford hub, and therefore it's number 01. After that, we get the block face, and I'll show you that on the map on the next slide. It basically is one side of the street, one portion of a block. And finally, within that portion of the block, the last 2 digits are my street number, 59. And finally, there's a checksum, which I'll talk about. The checksum is used for error correction. Let's say something goes wrong with one of the digits. Let's say something gets misread. And in the barcode, there's a digit that's miscoded. Then the checksum is used to identify which digit was corrupt and to correct it. So here we are. This map shows how the 6 digits after the town code work on the delivery route. My house is in the middle, up here. Each side of the street is assigned a block face. We are at number 1631. You can see there. The letter carrier drives along the even side of the street, counting down the street numbers, as the big arrow indicates, going this way down the street, takes a little detour down Marvin Place, which is a cul-de-sac, and continues. And then at the end of the street, can turn around and count up the odd side. So if you think about it, this means that 73 and 74 Taylor Road up here on the left, while they're adjacent numbers numerically, they're actually at opposite ends of the route. And you would not help the letter carrier if you put the street, if you sorted the street by number in order by digits. Okay, so how do we read these barcodes? Well, there are four basic rules here on the left. The bars represent sevens, fours, twos, ones, and zeros. It's kind of like binary code, but not quite. Every 5 bars add up to a zip code digit. We define a 7 and a 4 as a 0. That's how we get the 0, the number 0. And finally, there are always 2 tall and 3 short bars. This is used for error detection. So what happens now is, let's imagine that I would take my pen and put an extra line right here on the barcode. Well, in that case, this cluster of 5 would no longer have those 2 bars. It would now have 3 that are tall. Oh, I didn't mention they always start with a tall bar and they end with a tall bar. So this cluster of 5 right now is 2 talls, 3 shorts. If I were to write on the barcode and make this tall, it would now be corrupt. And then the checksum would be used to calculate what the number should have been. Over here on the right, you see a table that shows how to do each of these calculations. And I can assure you it's not necessary to memorize that chart. Here I am now showing you the answers coming in for each of these areas. Now here's the easy way to do it. If you're a hands-on person, the easy way is to visualize the barcode values. Imagine you put numbers on each of your 5 fingers, counting down 7, 4, 2, 1, and 0 from left to right. Now, whichever 2 fingers are up, add up to make the value for that barcode cluster. For example, here, the 1 and the 0 are going to add up. 1 and 0 are 1. Over here, 4 and 1 make a 5. And as I mentioned before, by definition, a 7 and a 4 are a 0. And if you think about it, it turns out that every possible number from 0 to 9 can be represented with 2 tall bars, two fingers upright. And that's why they had to use a 7 as the highest bar and not an 8, because in binary, you could not get 2 digits to represent every number. You wouldn't be able to get the 7. One of them, anyhow, doesn't work. Okay. An even easier way to do it is to use your computer. And I wrote this program a long time ago, and the reference to it's at the end of the talk. If you type a 1 for tall bar and a dot for short bar, and you just enter the bars that you're looking at on the envelope and then click decode barcode, it will tell you the answer down here. That barcode is a PostNet 11-digit delivery point code. It actually goes to the slot on my front door, and there are the digits represented with a checksum at the end. Okay, well, the early optical character readers were not able to read everything. They couldn't read the whole address very well. They basically just read the zip code. And in this case, we see it actually just represented 53100. And you'll notice in the zip code itself printed, it actually had the last 2 digits telling you what town it was. But the OCR wasn't confident enough at this point to dare do that. It just put in the first 3 digits and got it to the correct sectional center, the correct hub. And at that point, it had to be hand sorted thereafter. Well, what happens if you're doing handwriting? If you've ever tried to read handwriting with an OCR, you probably noticed they don't do very well. And here's an example of it. The correct zip code here is 70118, but it was actually decoded as 58202. So what was happening? What happened was the computer tried to find the address, and it starts looking in the lower right-hand corner and starts spiraling out, trying to find an address. Now, the address is right where it belongs, but unfortunately, the computer couldn't read the handwriting, so it kept on going and eventually blundered into the return address over here on the left. And that's what actually got barcoded. Now, of course, we have a bit of a problem coming up. If we barcode the address to be North Dakota, then it keeps getting sent back to the sender, and the recipient never gets their mail. And I'll talk a little bit later about what could be done to deal with that, to prevent that problem. Okay, well, I was compulsive about reading barcodes on envelopes. Even in the case in which it was beautifully printed, I didn't necessarily trust it. Besides which, I had read enough barcodes by eye to know that this first digit is definitely not a 9. I've got 7 is low, 4 is low, 2 is low, 1 is high, 0 is high. So the first digit of this barcode is a 1, not a 9, which is what was supposed to be. So naturally, I decoded it, and it turned out that the mailer of the business reply card here knew they were supposed to barcode their mail, but they didn't know why. So they simply reproduced the sample barcode out of the domestic mail manual and dutifully printed it on all the reply cards going to San Jose, California. If you're a postal zip code geek, you will know that 12345 is the corporate headquarters of General Electric in Schenectady, New York. And General Electric got a great deal of missent mail because of the misprinted barcodes, the sample barcodes being used. Here's perhaps my favorite barcode. In this case, this letter I received I'll go through the details. I used to ask stamp dealers for barcoded envelopes, and they would say they'd never seen one. I used to say, it's not possible. Let's go look in your wastebasket. And sure enough, every incoming envelope in their wastebasket had a barcode on it. The dealers just were not looking for them. However, no amount of money could get you a gem like this prized piece in my collection. It was addressed to P.O. Box 87930, The Hague, Netherlands. The early OCR system could not read that it misread it as the zip code and used it because it could not cross-check the full address. It didn't have a database to check addresses in the Netherlands. So, of course, without getting the full truth, the consequence was a wildly inaccurate barcode. The wonderful thing is, this cover got back stamped in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, up here on the back. I couldn't make this up. Fortunately, the recipient in the Netherlands knew Terry Hines was a modern postal history guru and sent this cover to him. He knew I was studying barcode errors and sent it to me. Sharing within the community is a wonderful trait of philatelists. Now, here's an impossible barcode. I can see that in 1 second for 2 reasons. First of all, it doesn't end with a tall bar, which is required. Remember, they all have to start and end with a tall bar, the PostNet barcodes. Secondly, it starts with 4 tall bars. And while the start bar is expected, you can't have 3 bars after it that are also tall. In fact, when I ran it through my lookup program, which reports errors, you can see that there were a lot of problems. And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 5 impossible clusters in that barcode. I have no idea what went wrong, but it was clearly bad. Here's another case. Obviously, we do not have 2 out of 5 tall bars in every cluster. I suspect this was a test pattern of some kind. Now, if you move your head around, you might be able to see the barcode on this envelope. There's a reason why black envelopes are not supposed to be used. There's a serious readability problem. I can tell you that Martin Marietta specialized in landing vehicles on Mars and shooting rockets into the air, so their motto was 100% mission success before they went into the postal business as well. When we called up for the field test from the field test in St. Paul, Minnesota, and told the vice president at Martin Marietta that we had failed to read 300 envelopes in a row, a string of invective came out of his mouth. We were working 15-hour shifts at night, and then in the daytime, we had to update headquarters and try to get a nap and some food. The vice president said this envelope was simply intolerable. He would call the postmaster general and read him the riot act. I tried to explain the postmaster general didn't make this envelope, and the mail's the mail. That's kind of a motto that people have when they're trying to process things. Um, but I had a little bit of success with that. Fortunately, it was a competitive round robin test in which all four vendors were trying to read the same mail. Since none of us could read it, it was a wash and effectively removed from the test. Here's an example with three superimposed barcodes. It's obvious here on the left, we're looking at the left side of one barcode, the right side of another, the two overlapping here in the middle, and a third one careening off the bottom of the envelope. That means the envelope was standing on its nose on the lower right-hand corner, and the trailing tail of it was up in the air a bit, which would cause the barcode to print like that. Not a readable barcode. Here's another example. In this case, what we're looking at is a double-fed envelope. And if you imagine two envelopes that are staggered apart on top of each other when they run through the system, the printer thinks it has one long envelope. So it printed the beginning of the barcode on one envelope and then the end of the barcode on the other envelope. And I can use my decoder to determine that this ends in 506. And I believe it was probably going to Aurora, Illinois. I think the cover on top was going to Aurora, Illinois, and this one was underneath. And the whole thing appeared to be that one piece, and the system printed the barcode across them. So they each had a useless fragment. This is a case of jail mail, and I just happened to try to decode the barcode. It looked fine. If you look at the address, 76230 is the end of is the zip code, and that's exactly what shows printed down below. But it turns out that is not the whole story because the +4 is wrong. It was encoded to 601 Decatur, I'm sorry, to 601 East Wise Street, and it should have been going to 601 Decatur Street. So it's interesting. I can't quite visualize how it was that East Decatur looked like East Wise, but that's what happened. And I think is an example of the difficulty of reading handwritten mail. Earlier in the hour, I showed this cover and I asked why it was misdirected. You may have heard of the Visa lottery problem in Merrifield, Virginia in 1991. Natives of 30 designated countries mailed in a total of 23.7 million applications for just 40,000 available U.S. immigration green cards. Unfortunately, there were some barcoding errors that misdirected mail to the lottery instead of to the intended address. This cover was addressed to an individual in Richmond, Virginia, 22090, but it got barcoded to the immigration lottery in Merrifield, Virginia, 22081. At the end of the lottery, it was realized that a lot of mail had been misbarcoded and went to the Visa lottery. This explained the reports of people's water being cut off because they hadn't paid their water bills. Before the 23 million unsuccessful Visa applications could be shredded, all the mail had to be reviewed. The USPS rubber-stamped apologies on the missorted mail and then reprocessed, rebarcoded, and sent it to the proper destinations. This happens to be a piece of personal correspondence and not a water bill. On the back of that envelope, you can see a large number of markings. These Perhaps you're familiar with the old multi-purpose letter sorting machines, MPLSMs. They were a human-machine hybrid about 50 feet long and 2 stories high. 12 operators sat at consoles typing in 5-digit zip codes for the envelopes being presented to them. The machine also printed a 2-character colored ID mark on the back of the envelope, which identified the machine. Here, for example, the letter C, and the operator, the second character, the number 1. That's the operator's position. And then the color told you which shift it was that was in operation. Obviously, a lot of human effort was invested in this letter from the 14 or so ID marks on the back and the multiple marks from the same machine. You can see there's a bunch of C's there, a bunch of E's. So this letter went through a lot of rework. There they are enlarged. Okay, normally the OCR system starts reading at the bottom of the address block, decoding the separated digits of the zip code to identify the city and state, which can be verified by moving up the address block. With a zip+4 code, the street name and the numerical range are defined already. So all that has to be done is to read the last 2 digits of the street number, and you've got the 11-digit zip code. Even without the zip+4, the computer can make educated guesses regarding the street name and associated street number. Finally, the recipient name is checked at the top to see if there's been a reported move at that address and if the recipient is now in a new place. Some handwritten addresses remain a challenge, especially when they're written in an unconventional order with the recipient at the bottom, as is the case here. USPS therefore developed a system to process envelopes the OCR system could not read. USPS prints a unique numeric luminescent ID barcode on the back of the envelope. I'm sorry, wrong button. There. So there you can see this is the using visible light. This is the barcode in the back of the envelope, which, as Bob mentioned before the talk began, it looks somewhat like a Canadian barcode. And then here in the UV light, you can see those pink bars lighting up a little bit easier. So because the barcode's luminescent, it can be printed on top of interfering graphics, and it can be read in the dark. The image of this envelope then is sent to an encoding station in a location where the operators are working at lower pay, perhaps, than in the big city. And they then type in the zip code for any envelope which cannot be coded by the computer. Then the envelope is passed through the machine again, which reads the visible light, the barcode in the back, looks it up, and says, oh, this is envelope number 50. And the operator said envelope number 50 is going to Lynbrook, New York, and they type in, it barcodes the 11563 barcode. In the beginning, this was done only for unreadable mail, but then it turned out that it was also a very nice backup. If the barcode was damaged or got wet and ran, then they could use the barcode on the front, they could use the barcode on the back as an alternate source of information. Okay, here's a case now of a double feed. And I believe what happened is that this envelope was on top. I'm sorry, this envelope was on the back of 2 envelopes passing through the machine. And so the image was read on the envelope on the top, the one that looks blue in my diagram, but the barcode on the back was on the back of my envelope, the tan one. And so what happened was when the 2 envelopes went through the first time, image was taken, the barcode was put on the back. Then when they were rerun, they came apart, and my envelope on the back now had the barcode for the one on the front and put the completely wrong address on it. And there we have it at the top again, from Aurora, New York, I believe it was. So I mentioned about the problem of loop mail, mail that's barcoded to the wrong place that keeps returning to the wrong place. And the post office did come up with some markings that they could use. And here's an example of one on the left, a box with these lines in it that interfere with the reading of the barcode and thereby prevents it from being read. And on the right is another one, sticker, which is actually placed over it and simply prevents it from being read. Here we are. Since I mentioned that barcodes on the back of the envelope are used as the tracking and backup barcodes, it's important to cover them up as well. So here's a case where white stickers were put on both sides of the card, the orange cards at the bottom. And on the top, we have another barcode blocking mark, the X's and I's, which work very nicely to prevent that barcode from being read. Okay, this barcode blocking marking is one of my favorites. It just has the no symbol, OCR. No OCR, it says upside down, and then the bars making the whole thing unreadable. It also has some nice auxiliary markings, undeliverables addressed, unable to forward, postage due, and a slogan down here, not deliverables addressed. Now, if you've looked at mail in recent years, you might be arguing that my tall, short barcodes, you haven't seen them in a decade, and that's true in the United States. We've now gone to a four-state barcode. It's also used in the UK and Australia and other places. Um, this has four types of bars: a short, an up, a down, and a tall. With more types of bars, more information could be encoded. This barcode encodes the full 11-digit zip code and the tracking number, the mailer ID, a serial number, and a mail service code. So the same technology printer can print it as the other one, but it conveys a lot more information. After these intelligent mail barcodes came out, my sister wrote to me and said she got these two envelopes addressed to her house in the same computer script, but the barcodes look completely different. Each intelligent mail barcode is supposed to look completely different because they have so many fields with different data. The serial number, the tracking number will be different if nothing else. With PostNet barcodes, it used to be possible to lay out 100 envelopes that you got at home in a column, look for all the ones that were different and pull them out, and all the ones that were the same were probably right. You just had to check them once. So as I was writing to my sister to explain that to her, I needed to prove it. So I decoded the barcodes, and believe it or not, they're not the same location. They're two different addresses. The one on the left was correctly barcoded to 1515 Cabrillo Street, and the one on the right was barcoded to 2525 Cabrillo Street. And you can kind of see, looking at the digit here, that it's kind of a cross between a 1 and a 2. And it turns out the same machine reading two different envelopes that were probably separated by just a few pieces in the pile got two different answers. So somehow or other it got to her. Maybe the mailman noticed the address was wrong when he got it up at 2025 and sent it back to the correct address. Well, 30 years ago, the distinguished philatelist Terry Hines, who I mentioned before, was in Warsaw, Poland for a year. And he noticed that every letter coming to him from the US had the same USPS barcode on it. Of course, the USPS does not list zip codes for Warsaw, Poland. So Terry wrote to me and asked what was happening. Gradually, reports came in from other countries with different consistent barcodes. It makes perfect sense that international zip codes exist. Imagine I mail a letter. If I mail it from Connecticut, the MLOCR reads it and barcodes it to the destination. If my letter is going to Canada, what are they going to do? Are they going to hand sort it at every step until it leaves the United States for Canada? How do they know which point of embarkation to direct the envelope to? Should it go east for Nova Scotia or west for British Columbia? The answer is the USPS quietly assigns international zip codes to every foreign country and indeed cities within Canada. These international zip codes enable the mail to be sorted on automation equipment throughout the USPS until it leaves our country. USPS took the unused 00100 to 00199 series. Notice here we're looking at 00144. They took the 100s and used them for international countries. And those of you who've telephoned England may know that the international code for England is 44 when you telephone. And so this kind of looks like you're dialing an international number, 001 for international, then 44 for England. So it's kind of an interesting adoption of the codes that were similar to what was already being done for telephoning. I searched for years trying to find answers to this, got more and more examples, and finally one day, a stamp collector named Bob Lehman in Grand Rapids, Michigan, who happened to be a dead letter clerk in the post office, got interested in this, and he walked over to the computer forwarding system and said, "What happened if a letter from the United States is being forwarded abroad?" And the clerk said, "I don't know, let me try." So they typed in a made up address in Germany, and it popped up with 00149-0000. That turned out to be the code for Germany. The only admission I ever got from a USPS official in 30 years was one letter 12 years ago from the recently retired USPS historian, Jennifer Lynch, who said people sometimes call them pseudo zip codes. I even put a Freedom of Information Act request in, and the USPS said they knew nothing about these things. I appealed last year to the General Counsel of the Postal Service and said that according to my calculations from their annual reports, there must be about 5 billion of these barcodes out there in the last 30 years. But they still denied my request and said they didn't know about them. You'll also see here the UK codes. These were applied when it got to the UK, the incoming and outgoing codes. I believe they represent the rough region the mail is going to, and then the more precise area. So it's like the beginning and the end of our zip codes. Well, I just finished explaining to you how 00144 is England. But the problem is, if you've only got the 100s available to work with, you can only encode about 100 countries, but there's more than 200 countries in the world. So originally what was done was after the first 5 digits, digits after that were used to encode specific countries. And so, for example, in the Caribbean, the +4 encoded about 6 different countries in the Caribbean, all with the same first 5 digits. But after 15 years, the post office decided to change the codes. Suddenly, Yugoslavia was 00144, which used to be England, and England became 00122. The logic beats me as to why they would have changed existing numbers that were working in countries that had unique codes. And I think it would have been a big problem on changeover day because a letter going to Yugoslavia from the East Coast and a letter from going to England from the West Coast might have both arrived at the same time in New York on their way to England, and yet one was going to Yugoslavia and the other was going to the United Kingdom with the same code of 00144. Here are examples of barcoded letters to Canada, and you can see originally Canada on the top was 00101 with a postnet code, and later on at the bottom with an intelligent mail barcode, we have 00299, and then the last digits, 3205, are actually encoding Edmonton, Alberta. So here's an example in which the codes are actually getting right down to the town, or the city in that case. Here's an example of a letter to Germany, and this has got some auxiliary markings on it. And you can see the yellow return to sender computer forwarding system label at the top, and you can see the pink German label as well, for unknown address or insufficient address, and being returned to sender. This envelope had a very difficult life. You can just barely make out 0040, and after that there's an 8, which has been crossed out with 2 magic marker marks. And this is something which I've noticed with the Japanese, that when mail is returned, they typically just put 2 marks, wiping out critical piece of information in the zip code, in the barcode, or in the address. It's a nice consistent rule of thumb. This had a 2nd generation international zip code and an intelligent mail barcode, and it was returned with a bilingual hand stamp, return unknown, authenticated with the personal hand stamps of the Japanese clerk and supervisor. So this rectangular thing here is stamped, and then these circular stamps are put on by the supervisor and the clerk, confirming that it's being returned as unknown. Back in the US, the computer forwarding system operator labeling it did not bother reading these English words and simply reported no mail receptacle. You can see that down here as the reason for return. Such markings are used in the US, and I actually published an article in 2006 in the Auxiliary Markings newsletter with 38 different no mail receptacle markings. It's crazy how many exist, but every time the snowplow hits a mailbox here, you know you have no mail receptacle for a while until it gets fixed. Well, the last slide is the 2nd mystery barcode system that I solved. The white label, top left, has what looks like an intelligent mail 4-state barcode, except it has only 57 bars instead of the required 65. Unfortunately, 4-state barcodes must be decoded with a computer program which has 0 tolerance for errors. Instead of providing partial data, they simply say invalid barcode, not 65 bars. I noticed these unusual barcodes on oversized letter mail for years. In fact, I published a paper on them in the April 2025 US Specialist, reporting the first time these unusual barcodes appeared on the cover of the journal was back in 2005, and for 20 years, none of us specialist postal automation people noticed on our own journal there were barcodes that had never been reported. At first, I assumed they were partial barcodes, but postal experts and philatelists had no idea. Finally, I just got lucky calling the USPS and asking to speak with an automation specialist. I reached Greg Smith in Cincinnati, Ohio, who knew nothing about these puzzling barcodes. However, he asked around, and 1 business hour later, I got an email. The barcodes were made by the Flats Mail Identification System, started in 2004 and running ever since. He directed me to the Federal Register, 1-page program announcement explaining the purpose of the program and how it works. Like the remote barcoding system barcodes I mentioned earlier, these are unique mail piece identifiers. And Bob, when we were speaking before the presentation began, mentioned that that's also what's used in Canada as a unique identifier as opposed to encoding the postal code. This approach works well for large pieces of mail, which are difficult to automate. Putting a unique ID on them with a link to the destination zip code in a database makes it possible for a downstream machine to scan them and determine their destination. My breaking news explanation was published in the next issue of the American Philatelist in February of 2025. I love finding treasures in my daily mail, and as so often happens in philately, it took a village of generous people to solve this problem. Well, thank you very much. Enjoyed presenting to you. My email is shown there at the top and below the website for the Auxiliary Markings Club, where the video will be available in a few days on YouTube. Also, the Intelligent Mail Barcode Decoder. Because they have very elaborate error correction, you cannot read them bar by bar. You have to use a reader. And you can type them in, or sometimes you can upload them. There's my PostNet decoder and the two book chapters I wrote about PostNet barcodes and about international letter barcodes. So I welcome any questions you might have.
That's great, Doug. Would you mind taking your slide down now then so we can see each other?
Certainly.
That'd be great.
There.
Yeah, perfect. That's terrific. That was a really wonderful presentation, and it's a fascinating area that I think you confirmed when you gave a slightly less complete presentation of this last week for the RPSC, that you are the primary and almost sole collector of these things. So, which I think is a wonderful place to be. But it's a really remarkably interesting subject, and you obviously understand it not just from a philatelic standpoint, but also from the actual inner workings. So thank you so much for doing it. Anybody have anything that
Thank
they
you.
would like to ask?
I'm sorry, just one quick point pertaining to that. The funny thing I learned is if you collect something unusual, it's very important to write articles about it and get the information out, and then other people will get interested. Recently, I've been buying all of my international covers for 25 cents, occasionally a dollar out of a dollar box. However, the last time I went to a stamp show, the dealer wanted $20 a cover. And I said, "How did that happen?" And he said, "Well, when I bought them at gas, uh, the dealer said he read an article in a anthology about these barcodes, and they're important, and I'm charging you $20 for them." So I guess the danger is that you publicize your passion too early before you have everything, and then you got to pay for it.
And we should mention that that excellent article appears in Considering Auxiliary Markings, which is available as a free download on the Auxiliary Markings website. So if you haven't seen it, we hope that you will have a look at it. And Doug's article is really quite remarkable. So, well, you can look at it this way. You may be paying a little bit more for the time being, but you can sell what you've got for a whole lot more. So,
Yes.
would anybody like to ask any
Yeah,
questions?
Greg, I'm sorry, Douglas. I thought, oh, fascinating. I'm really keen to see the 74210 when you're five bars and long and shorts and things like that. Then you went on to say that there are now four versions of the bars. Is there again a simple numerical deciphering of whether or not the bar is okay?
Not at all. The problem is the error correction on the old barcode. Each of the 11 digits is encoded independently, right? You just work your way across one, cluster by cluster.
Yeah.
And the end, you have a checksum. So the two error correcting mechanisms are number one, are there two tall bars and three short? That tells you which of the clusters is corrupt. If you see three tall or you see two tall or one tall or none tall. So the error correcting there is done digit by digit, and the checksum enables you to reverse engineer it and get the answer. With the modern intelligent mail barcode, there are many complex overlaying algorithms, and if you change a single digit, nothing looks the same.
Okay.
It's not like the whole front of the barcode is the same and the end of it changes. So you have to either type it in, or at my website, you'll see there's one website where you can upload an image and it will decode it. But I will warn you, the systems are very poor at reading things on dark backgrounds or something, and you've got to type them in. And it's just A for ascending and D for descending and F for full, the tall bar, and T for track for the short bar.
Again, thanks. Wonderful, wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Great question.
Doug, this is Frederick.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions about frankings on two of the covers that you showed.
Okay.
first cover that you showed that had three partial uh, codes printed on it, that was franked with a D alphabet stamp.
Okay.
And it had a couple of different postal cancels on it, and then it also was postage due. And I wondered if you had worked through that. Why was additional postage due for that cover?
I can't see with the naked eye what the date is, but I'm guessing. Let's see. This is domestic mail. The letter stamps were not allowed for international mail
Right.
for a period of time after they came out. I'm guessing that the letter D, if we look at the date, I believe it says 1985. I don't remember my rate chart, but my hunch is that D was not enough to mail a letter in 1985. Maybe it had gone up to E by then.
Could
D
be.
was 22 cents.
That's my guess. Um, yeah. And because it's going to a government agency, it's going to the Indiana Employment Security Division. They're probably not going to pay postage due happily.
No, I wouldn't think so.
If it was an order, if it was an order uh, envelope to a company selling expensive products, they might pay 3 cents to get the envelope with $1,000 order in it. But Indiana's not trying to give away their money, so they probably don't pay for it.
Now, the other cover is the one that was to the lottery,
Yes,
and that has two service inscribed fractional stamps, 10 point something, 10.1 or 10.2, and then some other stamps.
yes.
But that is not marked as having a collector's permit. Wonder if you thought about how did that get through the mail with those fractional, in that case, they were service inscribed, old pre-canceled stamps.
Correct. I'm looking at it. I have a hypothesis. I can't prove it. Obviously, we don't have any markings on it. I think those are probably either three. I think those are 3 cent stamps with it. The
Yes.
Probably a Remington statue. So there's 9 cents of postage plus the 20.6 or whatever that is, 20 point anyhow, 20 and a fraction cents of the service inscribed. My guess is this thing got misprocessed and ended up in a pile of 23 million mail pieces.
Mm-hmm.
They had to go through and either shred them or reprocess them. And they'd held that mail long enough that people's water was getting cut off because they hadn't paid the water bills for a few months. So my hunch is that the Postal Service was less concerned about getting cheated out of 22 cents than they were getting this unbelievable mountain of mail out of their way. So that's my guess. I honestly don't know. And of course, also, they are not tagged. So the facer canceller, in fact, I can see looking at it that at least two of them and maybe three of them are the cancels are hand cancels, possibly because it got spit out of the facer canceller because it had no fluorescence on the stamps.
Quite possibly. Worth a comment the next time that you show that slide.
Yes, yes, that's a great point, and it's funny how sometimes one gets so preoccupied with one piece of the envelope, the dealers ignore the barcodes, and I inadvertently missed that little detail, that big detail. Thank you.
And of course, you and I were just talking about the service inscribed stamps while we were waiting for your presentation to begin. I had that on my mind, and then the slide opened up with these two stamps that are fractional service inscribed, and I thought, my goodness, how interesting. It's coincidental, of course, but these connections just keep coming and keep coming.
That's great. I know that I did exactly what you described. I used to collect plate number strips, and I would buy 100 of a stamp and had a use for two strips of 5 out of the middle of it. And then I was stuck with the other 90 stamps to unload. And when I mailed Christmas cards to people, I did get the pre-canceled permit from the local post office, and I would have a box that was probably a square foot of stamps on it, just inch after inch of these pre-canceled stamps and my little permit number, and it worked beautifully.
Well, as I mentioned when we were talking before, I myself do not buy these, but I have a permit. I actually have two, one for where I used to live, one town over, and the town where I live in now, because I know so many other collectors who collect this material. So they end up buying the minimum numbers that they have to buy from the cave, or if they go to a first day ceremony, as I did with a friend in February, there was a minimum amount he had to buy in order to put stamps on covers. And they just give me the leftovers. They have stamps left over and they know I have a permit. They just toss them to me. I'll give those to Frederick. He has a permit. He'll use them up. And I put them on bills and use them up over time.
Wow, that's a whole new home business I never thought of, would be to go into a mailing business getting unwanted service inscribed stamps. That's great. Neat.
Anyone
Any
else?
other-
Doug, I noticed one of the envelopes, I think it was an envelope anyway, to London.
Yes.
And I think that was the only one that had, what is it, 6 digits and letters and numbers. Those
The
funny things, I think those are telling you exactly where the place is. But what does that relate to the zip code or the barcodes?
Oh, that's a great question. The the United Kingdom and Canada both use alphanumeric postal codes, numbers and letters. And in Canada, they're typically two clusters of 3. In England, 2 clusters of 3 is common. They sometimes go to 4, four characters. That code is how they sort mail at their end, and I'm not sure how finely it goes, if it actually goes all the way to a house or just a block, but it definitely gets it in the region. So in England, when they got that letter, they could use that code and sort it at least to the letter carrier and maybe even to the block or the street level. The codes used here are completely unrelated. The 44 for England literally is all of the United Kingdom, is 00144 on that cover you were talking about. And it says only that it's going to England. So when the mail leaves JFK or wherever it leaves in the United States to go to England, they just send it to a hub in England that's going to deal with it from then on. The United States is not doing anything within England. Well, I exaggerate slightly. They sometimes use the first digit after the 00144. The first digit would say London or away from London. A 1 was London and a 2 was not London. But the codes we have just get it out of our country in the United States, except for Canada. And as I described with the problem of Nova Scotia versus British Columbia, if we sent all of our mail, say from California to British Columbia, if that mail all had to come to New York City first and then get sent to Ottawa, and then in Ottawa, the Canadians had to send it back across the continent again, that would be very inefficient. So the post office here did coordinate with Canada Post and got the code for every city in Canada and gets it to that level. And then once it gets to whatever, Thunder Bay, at that point, it's entirely in the Canadian system. The US postal barcode is of no use beyond getting it to the city in Canada. And for every other country, again, like England, the barcode gets you to Germany, just plain Germany, and then from Germany, they have to deal with it in Germany.
I know that ours has barcodes on it, but I never even thought that it, related to where it was going.
Well, that
Um,
he can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is from the conversation I had literally 5 minutes before my presentation started. My understanding is that the Canadian barcodes are unique identifiers, like that flat smale barcode that I explained on my last slide. Um, in Canada, apparently that's a unique identifier and not representing the location the way they do here for our regular barcodes, but rather the computer simply reads this number, envelope 1,000,006, looks at, and asks the compute and asks the database, asks the computer, which envelope is that? And it says, oh, it's the one going to Ottawa, or it's the one going to Halifax. So reading the numbers, reading that barcode would tell you nothing about where it's going. Whereas here, I can read these barcodes and tell you where it's going. And that's how I can tell when they're misdirected.
because, for example, for my building, I've got the zip code for the city, and then there's the dash 4 digits, and 4 digits on the same thing is for my building, and it's different than for my specific location in the building.
Right. The 4 digits in an apartment building or a condo or something like that, the four
Was-
digits, depending on the size of it, let's say there were 5 apartments, the 4 digits would represent the building you're in, and the last 2 digits that you don't see, digits 10 and 11, they would actually be your personal apartment. If you're in a big apartment building or in a condo development, then there may be multiple plus 4 digits, and each of the separate structures might have its own, or maybe even each floor of each building would have its own. And then the digits 10 and 11 encode the actual apartment in that building.
Because with mine, I'm in a building that has 466 apartments.
Ah, well, then
And
there's going to be many plus fours.
yeah, because I don't know if mine is the only one that is designating my apartment, or
I
if
believe
there's a group of them like on the floor or something else.
I believe it should be your apartment, and the easy way to tell is go to the USPS website and look up address. There's a place where you can type in an address and it will tell you the zip code. If
Mhm.
you type in your address, including your apartment number, it should show you the exact zip code that you use, and it will say DP somewhere in there. It will be showing you different parts of the zip code. It will say DP. DP is delivery point, and
Ah,
the DP will be your apartment. If you now look across the hall or up the hall and pick another number and type in the same street address, same building, but apartment number 10, not 9 or 8 or 7, you should discover that every one of them gets a different 11-digit zip code.
wow, interesting.
And I actually did this. Somebody who's on this call actually asked me about this about 2 months ago. And I went through his condo and looked up and found that in his condo development, there were 5 different plus 4 codes used. And then within each plus 4, every single apartment number had its own code.
Now, how would I look up mine, did you say?
Go if you email me, I can send you the link.
Oh, okay.
Informed delivery.
Pardon?
It's an informed delivery. Look up
Oh,
zip code by address.
yeah, sure.
That's
Well,
for, that's
yeah,
for zip plus 4.
right. Yeah, there are a bunch of them. If you I'm DRQUINE at gmail.com. If you send it to me, I can send you the links. There are several places. The Informed Delivery has it, and also the Zip address site has it.
Okay, and your zip code, your email again?
Dr. Quine, QUINE at gmail.com.
You might be able to find that link in the chat. If you click on the chat at the bottom, I think the link that I put in there might be the correct link there, Doug.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy. If anybody's got any questions, feel free to write me. And yes, I think that link in the chat looks like it probably is the one. Look up by address. Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
well, thank you. Thank you so much, Doug, for a really interesting presentation. And I know your enthusiasm and your knowledge will cause others to pay attention to this little explored aspect of postal history. And so we really appreciate you doing it. And as I say, if you're a member of the Auxiliary Markings Club, and this commercial usually takes place at the beginning of our presentations, but here we go. If you're a member of this wonderful club, you can find Doug's Tony Warrakevich winning article on this subject. And in one of the recent last 2 years worth of our publications, or you can read his excellent article in the Anthology, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute. The address for the Auxiliary Markings Club is postal-markings.org. We have a wonderful newsletter. As we say, it's the best deal in philately, and if you're not a member, why not become one?
Oh, I am.
Good.
I have
Excellent.
been for quite some time.
Excellent.
Excellent.
And then, of course, you also will want to check out the YouTube channel, or you can access the previous examples of these Second Tuesday talks also on the website, on our postalmarkings.org website. But also we have a really active Facebook page, Auxiliary Markings Club on Facebook. There's a new interesting auxiliary marking every day. And so wonderful way to get some knowledge about things you might not know about. Here's the Anthology, a really broad and diverse collection of articles and covering the globe. And as we say, it's available for free as a download from our website. So please feel free to have a look at that. And last of all, sadly, this is our last presentation until September. We're going to take a break for the summer. Although so many people have complained about that next year we will continue through. Next year's series is almost complete, so we'll continue through the summer. We invite you to come back and join us on September the 9th at 7 p.m. When Regis Hoffman will do a really fascinating talk on private auxiliary markings on Hollywood fan mail. So we hope you'll join us for that. And
will we get the link for that also?
It's always
That's on the website. I've put at our website at the top in the news section, I always show what the next talk is. And now that my talk is over, I will put the next talk there. And also down below is a calendar listing the entire year's worth of presentations that are forthcoming. Well, the ones that have happened and the forthcoming ones are shown every month.
Are we going to have a meeting or a talk or something at GAS?
well, we have one every second Tuesday of the month, except for July and August.
No, I mean at the stamp show here in Chicago.
Yes, no, we're going to have a meeting at GAS. And Gary Lowe, who is on this Zoom call tonight, will actually be our speaker.
Well, that's right. I think I saw something about that.
Beautiful.
I've got to take a look at the huge number of meetings and see what's there. I don't know if they've got all of them listed.
All right. Well, thank you. All right, everybody. Well, have a wonderful night, and we will look forward to seeing you in September. And thanks again,
Great.
Doug, for a wonderful presentation. Good
And
night.
thank you all for coming.